Hello. I hope all of you guys are good out there, and thank you for coming to join our other series on Immigration Coffee Talk, Immigration Borders and Initiatives. Once again, we're here talking about our neighbors, our great neighbors, Canada, and we are here with Evan Green, who's been a partner and establisher of Green and Spiegel for many years. He's the top-rated immigration attorney, well, in Canada, but probably in the country. And Marcela Bermudez, a Green Spoon Martyr partner, who is also recognized for all her accomplishments in the immigration field. We look forward to talking to you about immigration today and about what's been happening on the border in terms of travel, in terms of trade, and how that has affected both the US and Canada during COVID times. And also just the clarity in the guidelines that have been issued that leave us a little confused at times. I also want you to know that we do these coffee talks every 8 to 12 weeks. And our next one is going to be on family law, surrogacy, and immigration, a hot topic for many. So,
little different.
Yeah. You would be surprised. Where you're born really does matter.
Mm-hmm.
Careful who you use. But I will say that as we continue today on the Canadian border issues, prior to it starting today, Marcel and Evan and I were all talking about some things, and Canada is kind of, is very strict. And I will say that we were talking about something that may not make a lot of sense to you guys, but the fact that no one in Canada has been able to have a haircut since November is indicative of how strict they are, that they have not opened yet their barber salons even. So this is no joke when you go into Canada. This is strict, and they are honest to God strict about it. Unlike some of our states in the United States, even you go from state to state here, we're never really clear what the state rule is in Vermont versus Florida. So, I mean, it can be very confusing out there. So I guess we're going to start with Marcela and talk about some of the changes and go from there.
Good morning, everyone. Good to have you all back. So we're going to go through some of the U.S., not just with our borders, because there's probably been some more changes that are probably really relevant and important for you folks. On the Canada side, our land borders, the restriction that we had before is still in place. It was extended to April 21st. We probably might see another extension. So that's been kind of ongoing. When we hear Evan, we'll see, we'll probably get an indication of when or if it will be changing. I guess a lot will depend also on how Canada is doing with its COVID. Obviously, there's a direct correlation between vaccinations and restrictions. So more people get vaccinated, your restrictions start to come down a bit. So it's important internationally for everyone to be kind of in the same footing. U.S. has a little bit of an advantage on that, usually, because they're getting in a lot of their vaccinations in. What else? Let's go through. We talked last time about the HL and J ban, we call the Trump ban on HL and J visas. That sunset March 31st. It wasn't extended. It wasn't talked about. It just died its slow death, and it's gone. But there's some new things, which I'm going to get to. COVID testing is still required for all air travelers. You're coming in to the U.S., anyone, U.S., and it doesn't matter who you are. If it's an air, if you're coming in by plane, if you're flying in, you need to get tested before you arrive. It's 3 days before. The only thing that has changed slightly is now they're coming up with differences. If you're vaccinated, fully vaccinated, meaning I think it's 2 weeks after your last vaccine versus not vaccinated, they'll treat you differently in terms of what you have to do prior to departure and what you have to do upon entry. Some people have to quarantine, others don't. That's what's changing for vaccinated versus fully vaccinated versus non-vaccinated. CDC has an excellent chart on it with information. So definitely know before you go. You want to make sure about travel restrictions. You want to make sure about quarantine restrictions and also about the other countries' requirements. That's critical. You might be okay on the U.S. side. You have to know what you need to do on the other end. The travel ban is still in place. They added with Biden, South Africa was added. So we still have the restriction with if you're coming in from one of the countries, not a nationality. If you've been in any of these countries, you have to spend 14 days elsewhere to be able to come in. What else? With the travel ban, there was a big change, an important change with national interest exemptions. National interest exemptions used to be, they had an exception for e-visa holders, for managers, for executives. They've changed that radically. Now it's called critical infrastructure. You have to be a key member of a critical infrastructure areas. It hasn't been defined by the CBP, by Department of State, so they're relying on Department of Homeland Security definition of infrastructure sector. Their sectors are limited, but they're also ambiguous at the same time. There are some that are obvious, which is health, security, emergency. There's others that are financial services. That's in critical infrastructure. The question is, how far are they pushing, or how broad are they allowing it to go? And a lot of this is, again, discretion, consulates. What are the consulates allowing? Now, here comes the big wrinkle in this. The consulates are now, what they're doing is, because of this national interest exemption, on their own, they're saying, well, if I can't give you a national interest exemption and you're in, let's say, France, I won't give you a visa either. Now that there's a lawsuit, that's what the exclamation point there. Lawsuit. There's usually a lawsuit. We don't like what we see, we sue, which is good, because in this instance, they've completely overstepped their boundaries. They are refusing to give visa appointments to people who can't establish a national interest exemption, which makes no sense. The restriction is you can't get a national interest exemption. Why can't I get a visa in France, go to another country for 14 days, and then come in? I'm in compliance. I'm within the law. So lawsuit filed about a week ago about American Immigration Lawyers Association, along with other attorneys. We're monitoring that. We're hoping that there's a change, at least give these folks a visa. There will be a backlog because of this. There's also a backlog because of the sunset of Trump's HL and J visa. Now there's everyone that's been waiting outside in a queue, waiting to get scheduled. Just so that you guys get an idea, about 160,000 or some odd applicants were affected by that Trump restriction HL and J's. So there's a line, everyone. There's a queue. We're waiting to see what's happening. Okay, I think that's it in a nutshell, folks. Canada is going to be the interesting one.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, over to Canada. What can I tell you? Well, we're currently in Ontario. I'm in Toronto. We are in our third or fourth lockdown. We are in a 4-week lockdown. It's not being lifted until May 7th. It doesn't affect travel, but they do. If you have a non-essential reason, you're not supposed to leave your house, basically, is what we're in right now. In terms of immigration, what has happened is nothing good. As Patsy talked about initially, everything is just getting tightened. So when we look at how the situation works, there is no discretionary travel to Canada at this time. So if you are, however, applying for a work permit that is deemed to be essential from the US, and you can still make the same applications as you always could. So if you're an American citizen, or if you're from a visa exempt country and you're applying for a work permit at the border, you can still do so. What has changed since the last time we spoke is testing. Marcella, you talked about, you needed a test before you could get on a flight. To come into Canada, entering to Canada, whether you're Canadian, American, work permit holder, whatever the case may be, you have to have a COVID test, and it's the nasal one, done within 3 days of entry, okay? In addition, they're going to give you a test at the border. So whether it's the land border or the air border, you still have sort of 2 tests before you get in. But one of the new things that they've done is if you are flying into Canada, and right now, international flights only arrive in 4 airports in the country: Montreal, Toronto, Calgary, and Vancouver. If you're arriving in any of those areas, you have to make a reservation at a government approved hotel where you are expected to remain for 72 hours at your own cost and pay for your food for 3 days, or until your COVID test that you did at the border comes through. Then you can leave the government quarantine hotel, sort of a hybrid in what they were doing in New Zealand and Australia. So the first 3 days you're there until you get the second test. If you test positive, you're stuck there for 14 days. You can't leave, okay? However, if you're negative, as soon as you get the negative test, you can leave, but you still have a 14-day hard quarantine. So it's not 3 plus 14. Those 3 days come out of the 14 days of quarantine.
Let me
Now,
ask you something. Let me ask
sure.
you. I mean, how much, so let's just pretend I'm gonna fly. Obviously, I'm not an essential traveler into Canada. Obviously, they don't want me to come in. They're putting every barrier possible. What kind of a test do they give me besides my test I always bring? What kind of test do they give you on the border? Is it
So
nasal? Is it like?
It's nasal. It's
Okay.
nasal again. So what happens is you arrive at the airport, and assuming you make it through immigration, even a Canadian citizen, right? You make it through. You have to use, there's a special app, the ArriveCan app. From that, they print out a label. They give you a little baggie with your name in it, and they send you down the hall where there's a series of people set up to do these tests, okay? So it's done at the airport. Before you leave the airport, you do this test, and then you go from the airport to the hotel. Now, the crazy part is when you talk about inconsistency, right? You don't have to do this if you go through the border. And there was an article in the CBC the other day saying that Buffalo cabbies think this is the greatest thing that's ever happened because their business is up 70%. So anybody who is in the US who wants to avoid any risk of the government hotel just goes to Buffalo and drives across the border because it doesn't apply.
But I
They
thought
still have to justify the essential.
You still have to justify your essential.
Mhm.
well, I couldn't make an argument that I'm essential, let's say, if I went to go visit my friend Evan. Marcel and I are
No,
gonna
but let's
visit
say you were
Evan.
coming up for work, Patsy. You had a big assignment and you were applying for a work permit at the border.
I am
Uh,
not.
Under CAUSMA, the Canada-US-Mexico agreement,
Yes.
okay?
Yes.
You could make that application at the land border, subject to 14 days of quarantine, okay?
Yes, not gonna happen.
So, yeah, I mean, you're
So
stuck for
basically, to
14
get
days.
into Canada, I'm going to be touched, another exam with my nose, and then I'm going to pay for a lovely hotel with mediocre food for at
Right.
least 3 days alone, going crazy in a room by myself.
Yeah.
And how do you
And-
know you have a lovely hotel? Do you know?
Well, there's a list of hotels. And so you get to choose 3-star, 4-star, 5-star, like all the airport hotels are part of this. And they think it's great business too. Now, so there's another test you have to do too, Patsy. So you do one before you get on the plane or cross the border.
Right.
You do one at the border. And then at 10 days, they give you a kit when you leave the airport or the border, and you got to do another test, okay? And this other test, it's interesting. I know about all this because like my kids have come a few times across the border. You have to do it online. They have a nurse watching you do it to yourself up your nose, and then they come and collect the test, and that's at 10 days, okay? Now,
So you
during
have-
the 14
This is
days
live.
of
You're like-
quarantine,
What
oh
about
no,
if
it's quite,
what if you have like someone who's 80 years old that you're traveling with? You got to get them there. You got to zoom them in. Not everyone is technologically savvy. Do they have
well,
exemption?
see, the government's big issue was snowbirds and March break, spring break.
No.
They did not want people traveling, period. Now is not the time to travel.
Mhm.
So this is one of the things that they introduced. Now, you want to laugh? Okay, so if you go across the border, drive across the border, the hotels don't apply to you. They only apply if you're flying in. However, if you're flying private, okay, you can arrange for special testing upon arrival. You still need to pay for 1 night at the hotel, but the private terminals have an arrangement where you get your tests back within a couple hours and you don't have to do the hotel at all. So
That's so, I mean, for those who have an unlimited expense account, either by themselves or through their employer, that would be the way to go.
yeah,
Can you get exempted at all through any type of flat folding? where you
yes.
Go in
Now
and-
there are quarantine exemptions. They're hard to get. And the basis of a quarantine exemption is non-discretionary issues. So for instance, I'll give you the perfect example. We had a doctor who had a vacation home in Florida and went to her vacation home in Florida and was coming back.
That
and
sounds
she-
essential.
Yeah. Well, no. Coming
So,
back. So she's
No,
on the
statement.
essential.
Okay.
She's on the essential list as a doctor. Okay.
Okay,
So
I
she
got it.
says to public health upon arrival, "Hey, I'm essential. I'm a doctor. Okay. I should get a quarantine exemption because I'm listed as one of the essential workers." Okay. And they come back and say, "Yeah, but you left the country knowing that you had a 14-day quarantine and you left for a non-discretionary purpose." So in order to get these exemptions, you have to show that your entry to the foreign country was non-discretionary. You had to be there, okay? You had to be there in purpose, even if you're on the essential list. Now, there are quarantine exemptions for people who cross the border all the time. If you have things where you go across all the time and you have to be there in person. So, like for us as lawyers, we're doing everything by Zoom, okay? Very difficult to get a quarantine exemption because why do you have to go there? Why do you have to be out of your house, okay? Why do you have to do this in person? That is part of the argument. And you can apply in advance for a ruling from public health. Those rulings take a long time to get. And, to your point that you talked about the 80-year-old and how difficult this would be. I mean, there are quarantine exemptions for unusual circumstances. Give you one that we had. He was an adult who was like 23, 24 years old, but was autistic and went to special school in the United States, Canadian citizen, coming back to be with his parents. There was no way he could be in the hotel for 3 days. No way. Okay? No way. So we explained that and had doctors notes to show that this would, there's just no way. And he was exempted from the hotel portion. Okay. But, you talk about strategizing and how you do things. And there's so much inconsistency.
Yeah,
And that's the problem.
that's the
right?
problem at our borders
Mhm.
too. I mean, there are
Right.
they follow the CDC guidelines to come into the United States with the COVID. Now there's this recent lawsuit that Marcella had mentioned where a lot of people get their visa, then they go to Costa Rica or Mexico. Because, Mexico is one of those open areas where they're like, if you wear a mask, you can wear it. If you don't, you don't. It doesn't matter. We're here. What do you need to get in? Nothing. Clothing.
Right.
I think it's down to clothing.
Right.
I think they have a no nudity rule. That's it. Just that. I mean, it's like nothing. I mean, every country is locking down.
Right.
So, I think at that point they were just, I think they're just looking at. I mean, I don't know why there's no guidelines that are really helping out because a lot of our people are getting in and not having issues, and then the most unsuspecting ones have problems.
Yeah. I mean, one of the questions I get a lot of, especially from the snowbirds, so your 80-year-olds that you talked about. Hey, I've been in Florida for the last 4 months or 5 months. I'm fully vaccinated.
Yeah, fully
What?
vaccinated is a big one.
Fully vaccinated. I'm fully vaccinated. Why do I have to quarantine? Okay. Well, it's very, very interesting because Canada doesn't recognize any of that. It doesn't matter that you're fully vaccinated. And my personal opinion is that ain't going to change anytime soon in Canada until we get our vaccinations. Because you guys are so far ahead of us in that regard. I mean, I don't know what your percentage
Well,
is.
just recently, we were way behind before.
No, you're right. You're right.
And
I
we
mean,
used to have conversations. Canada, as you recall, Marcella and Evan, Canada was way ahead, but now we have the vaccine.
Well, they had better controls in place early on.
Yes, but our vaccination rollout has been very slow, still is slow. I mean, if you're under 60, it's very hard to get vaccinated in Canada right now. Okay. So until such time as we catch up to the United States, I don't think we're going to see anything on that. And actually, yesterday was the first time the government sort of put something out in that regard, saying vaccinations don't mean anything yet. Okay. We're looking at the guidance and we will make a determination as it moves forward. But there's a big push now to get people vaccinated. And until that happens, politically, they can't say, you know, Patsy, you're an American citizen, you're fully vaccinated, come on in, you don't have to quarantine. And me, Canadian citizen, who's not fully vaccinated, if I go to the US and come back, I have to quarantine. Politically, that's untenable, right? Why do you get an advantage that I don't get as a Canadian? So that's why I'm saying what I'm saying, that has to equal out, and hopefully in the next 4 to 6 weeks, it will.
But for US, for Canadian citizens who are coming into for US citizens who are coming to work in Canada, and the difference between that and a Canadian coming to work in the US are extreme.
The 14 days and all the testing and
all the testing, the 14 days, or I take a private airplane and, you know, my company's not going to pay for that. And so either mine, thank you. And for the US, for the Canadian citizen coming to the US, it's simply going into Pearson, and you don't even have to make the argument that you're essential. Well, Pearson, you have to make the argument for everything, but you know that you're a human being.
No, but at the border you do. So that's the crazy part into the US.
You fly. I mean, you don't come through the border. You fly, but you still need the COVID test. You're an air traveler. You need COVID.
Yeah,
test.
You need COVID. You still need.
But that's it.
That's it.
That's it.
I mean, there's restrictions. So of course you have all once you're in, you're supposed to self quarantine 7 days, 14 days. Question is, how do they monitor it? How do they control it? They really don't. That's where Marcella, we fail. We have a big fail. That's where we have a big fail.
You raise an interesting point, because in the Canadian system, they do follow it up. And we're hearing more and more, like when we first started, it sounds so long ago, right? Last summer, when all this craziness started with the quarantine and quarantine exemptions. And it was rare that public health followed up. You might get a phone call in your 14 days, maybe, right? Now you're getting a robocall every day. You're getting live calls every 3 days. And we're hearing more and more about getting knocks on the door saying, hey, you said that you were quarantining at this location. Where are you quarantining? Let's take a look. So it is becoming stricter. And in the summer, when we heard that people were being visited, it was usually because somebody was, to use the legal phrase, a dick at the border, and they were following up because of their behavior at the border.
Legal phrase.
There you go. Right? So bearing that in mind, but now we're seeing it far more across the border, and especially in the cities. Like, you know, if you're quarantining in the cities, you can expect, like, they're really strict. The 14 days is 14 days.
Well,
CDC for us has like a 7 or 10 day, but who's monitoring us? I mean,
and also for us,
they don't.
For us too, Evan, it's state by state. Like,
that's the struggle. That's the struggle.
Within the US, it's still a struggle. You have people who fly into New York from Florida, or fly into New York from here or there within the state. And like, I heard Vermont, Massachusetts, I mean, they're basically like, who are you? You know, where are you coming from? We will find you, right? And with some quarantine rules, while we're a little bit I feel like a lot of people come in from Florida and they're like, okay, I've done everything I think. There's no follow-up. At the border, they don't know. The guidelines are very unclear.
Mm.
I just wanted to take a minute too, just to also say, how are we compared to the rest of the universe? We talked a little bit about New Zealand and Australia. You know, do we bring up China? I mean, are they really doing other exams there? I don't know. I mean,
They are. We talked about it, right?
yes.
The anal
So other
test.
countries, you know, this country you have-
Welcome.
Right.
so other
But
countries-
it depends. I think what I was talking to my niece who's heading there soon, and she's all panicked about it. She's like, "Oh no, not me." But it depends on how many people have tested, if their situation on the flight. But they've already mentioned it to her. She's going for work. It's a possibility. Hopefully, it's not you, but
what we're
it's
talking about
there.
is that some countries have, you know, as you get tested, you know, like Canada tests you, other countries test you, even though you already have a test. But China's taken an extra step to say we're not going to do it through the nose. We're going to do it a different way. And that way can be very invasive for people because people
Of
don't.
course. Patsy, but I think that you in the United
Mhm.
States have a different view of all of this. And it's far more laissez-faire than in the rest of the world. There are such strict rules everywhere. Like, you know, I was shocked to find out, and this is recent for me, that in Australia, you have to apply for permission to leave the country.
Right.
Okay. And to think about that as we do,
Mhm.
we live in a democracy. I can't even imagine that I'd have to apply to leave Canada, right? Sounds ridiculous.
Yeah,
But-
which is why in the U.S. it's so different because our freedoms are define us. So any restriction, it's a problem for everyone.
Yeah, that's, you know.
Sometimes it's necessity, but we don't see it that way as a whole, for the most part.
Yeah.
No, but I
and-
mean, that's the thing that like you raised. It's so important to, before you plan a trip or you're going somewhere,
Be
there are
informed.
huge restrictions in these countries and
And expense.
Huh?
Expense. Just the expense. All of a sudden you're planning your trip with your family to see family members. You have a family of 5, you know, on the border, you know, who didn't used to just get in the car, drive into Canada, have a good time, go camping,
Right.
go fishing, call it a day, right? Now you're going to go in, you're going to be quarantined, you're going to be this. This is all these added expenses.
You
that
have to
fun.
have your
Not even
quarantine.
fun.
Yeah, no, you have to have your
Mhm.
quarantine plan at the border. They want to know where you're going to be so they can check in on you.
Yeah,
Right?
you're going to be stuck in a bedroom for like days and in a hotel with your children that are young,
Right.
screaming.
Right.
Okay, and you pay that privilege. Listen, there's a question about tourism. I mean, tourism. When do you think tourism will open? I just got to get that.
Well,
there.
it's interesting in Canada.
I mean, it's
there
open.
are-
You can go in.
There's nothing right now. There's no discretionary travel, right? But even within Canada, certain provinces to provinces have restrictions. So, you know, I have a big anniversary coming up. So I was saying, okay, let's go to Newfoundland in Canada. Don't have to cross the border. Okay. You can't get in. Okay. So the tourism industry is pushing. And that's why vaccines are so important.
Mhm.
And let's hope, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, by Canada Day, 4th of July, that things start to change. But, you know, right now we're in lockdown. So is it going to change that much? I don't know. But we can only hope. But I mean, President Biden talked about that. He wanted the 4th of July to be somewhat normal. Hopefully, if the vaccine rollout continues, we can see tourism.
I mean,
But
look
right
at
now, there's nothing. Like, I can't even go if I want to go in Canada.
But that has got to be, you know, just, I know we have to wrap this up, but that has got to be creating major havoc on our economy on both sides of the fence and all the trading that goes on. Although all these trucks are freely going across the border, supplies and trade.
That's continuing. But, you know,
Yeah.
like the airlines, Air Canada got a buyout or a bailout yesterday. They
Yeah, I
announced
read
it.
that. I was reading.
Right? But there's, I don't know if any of you have ever used it. There's Porter Airlines, which is sort of this smaller airline that flies into Toronto Island. They haven't flown a plane in a year, and they've just
Wow.
pushed it forward to June 21st before they operate any, right? So there's so many things that have been cut and lines cut. I mean, under this hotel rule, what happened was they basically, Air Canada agreed to suspend all flights to the Caribbean and Mexico because they didn't want anybody traveling. So that's supposed to start again next month. I don't know, right? The tourism industry doesn't exist right now, other than the hotel stay for when you arrive in the various cities.
That's all they're making their money on, the hotel stay. And
Mhm.
Them
luckily
and
if
the
they got
cab
on the list, the
drivers.
hotel got on the list. I want to wrap this up saying anyone who's traveling, I mean, Europe has a lockdown, you know.
Yeah.
And
If
people
you don't need to go,
don't
unless
go.
you have a planned return, and you can't ask for a national interest exemption before you leave. You have to be in country, meaning in Europe, before you ask for it. So,
And they have, you know, just so, you know, I mean, you have to plan ahead, but you obviously, if you need to travel, if you need your visa, you know, you know, you're going to have to sit in your own country. You may be homesick for your country, and your country may not be subject to the 14 days. They may not be Australians.
I
They
read
may
one
be-
thing this morning that
What?
gives me hope, because Israel's ahead of everybody on all this stuff. I think they're opening to tourism the middle of May, if you're fully vaccinated. Okay, so you'll be able to go and come back without restrictions. Let's hope.
I know,
So-
but
And they're ahead.
but if Israel's doing it, does that mean the rest of Europe will do it? I
Well,
don't
let's
think.
hope. They're ahead, right? They're ahead of everybody with their percentages. So
what's your
once everybody-
percentage? Do you know?
Oh, it's like 60%
Oh.
fully vaccinated.
Yeah, we're like
And
25.
I don't know how many have had one. Basically,
It's
very
unfortunate.
high.
We're like 22, 25%, something like
Right.
that. But we should be more because the vaccines are here. But
Right.
you have the non-vaxxers. I'm not getting vaccinated, but what it is, it sets us further behind than where we should be.
But let's hope.
So
Let's hope.
it's an
let's
interesting issue. Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, it is an interesting issue. Oh, you guys are cutting us off. Thank you guys for viewing us.
They're giving us the boot.
And I hope that you can all go to Newfoundland soon. It's beautiful.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Stay safe, everybody. And get
All right.
vaccinated.
Again,
Yeah. Thank you all.
thank you all.
Thank you.